Despite the rapid development at extremely high rates of economic growth, modern India is not a country that is famous for high standards of living. Nevertheless, it has not always been like this. In fact, for most of human history, India was synonymous with the richest and luxurious lifestyle. Before fertilizers and mechanization were introduced, it was obvious that regions where peasants could have several harvests a year due to the amazing climate conditions enjoyed higher living standards than northern regions. During the times of the Mughal Empire around 600 AD, India was one of the most prosperous and technologically advanced regions in the world. It accounted for roughly 25% of the world GDP, and Indians were rapidly moving into cities. An average Indian was slightly richer than an average European. Moreover, ingenious irrigation technologies reduced the demand for peasants and encouraged hundreds of thousands of people to move to rapidly expanding cities. In order to better understand how different world economy and the population of the world were in those years, let's compare the territories of the Mughal Empire, that was basically made up of what is now Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, with France and the Holy Roman Empire, political entities that roughly correspond to what is now called Western Europe by the United Nations. Take a look at this chart. 400 years ago, the size of the population of Western Europe was virtually equal to that of the Mughal Empire. But now the situation is completely different, as Western Europe has 6 times less people. Now let's compare how GDP changed in these two regions. Despite the tremendous difference in the size of the population, Western Europe has a much larger economy. This obviously influenced how GDP per capita in both regions changed. Note that 400 years ago Western Europeans were slightly poorer. In this episode, I will do my best to answer two equally intriguing questions. Why was India so rich several centuries ago? Why is modern India significantly poorer than Europe? This episode focuses on the Mughal Empire, a political entity that can easily be compared to 17th century Europe. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and recommend the topic for next video in the comment section. Although the name of the Mughal Empire was actually formed from Persian name for Mongols to denote that its rulers were distant descendants of Genghis Khan, the empire itself had almost no connection to Mongols. In fact, India was one of the very few powers that managed to resist Mongols. Meanwhile, millions of educated people from Central and Western Asia fled Mongol rule and eventually came to the Indian subcontinent. Thus, starting from the 13th century, northern India was constantly influenced by Muslims and was actually ruled by various Muslim dynasties unrelated to each other. The most influential power that controlled the largest parts of modern-day Pakistan, India and Bangladesh was the Delhi Sultanate. In 1526, Babur, a chieftain from what is now Uzbekistan, managed to defeat the Sultan of Delhi. Babur's grandson Akbar eventually managed to create one of the most sophisticated administrative systems of its time. Despite originally taking control over the vast territories by military might, Akbar did not suppress the local population. The emperor encouraged the development of Indo-Persian culture and sought to provide equal opportunities to numerous administrators with different backgrounds. Such tolerance to the non-Muslim population won him wide support. One of the most important economic reforms that actually led to rapid economic growth was the introduction of agricultural taxes that had to be paid in a stable silver currency. This encouraged millions of peasants to enter larger markets and to grow more cash crops, such as cotton and indigo, or to get involved in various crafts. The Mughal administration encouraged the development of sophisticated irrigation systems that boosted agricultural output and allowed hundreds of thousands of people to concentrate on the production of a wide range of manufactured goods. Moreover, the Mughal authorities encouraged the introduction of new crops brought from America, such as maize and tobacco. Arguably, the two most important industries that contributed to India's reputation as one of the world's major economic hubs were textile industry and shipbuilding, concentrated heavily in the eastern part of the empire, in modern-day Bangladesh. The Bengali rulers, who controlled not only the production of muslin and other fabrics, but also the distribution through the extensive trade networks, were generally believed to be among the richest and the most influential people on the planet back in those days. No wonder the European age of discovery was largely made possible thanks to the motivation to find the shorter routes to the tremendous riches of India. Alongside spices, fabrics were an important good that was imported to Europe in large quantities, with numerous scholars suggesting that textiles accounted for around a half of goods brought to Europe from South Asia. Thus, numerous economic tendencies actually coincided with what was happening in England in the 17th century. Textile industry was one of the primary factors standing behind the proto-industrialization. The Mughal Empire originally enjoyed a competitive edge, as the price for grain, that was the primary good for all peasants, used to be 2-3 times lower there. Therefore, lower wages allowed for higher profits and led to growing inequality. The elites in the Mughal Empire, unlike in Western Europe, gradually got accustomed to the stable source of high income and eventually lost the incentives to invest in new technologies and enterprises. Despite originally enjoying advanced agricultural techniques unknown to European peasants, such as seed drill used to evenly distribute seeds in soil, Indian peasants over time became less productive due to the elite's indifference to the implementation of new technologies. While European merchants and bankers eventually managed to accumulate significant wealth and invest in various industries, their Indian counterparts failed to do so. Moreover, it is crucial not to underestimate the role of various social and economic innovations. The introduction of public companies that could distribute the risk between thousands of investors encouraged numerous entrepreneurs and sailors in Western Europe to travel to distant lands and bring enormous wealth to the European continent and beyond. For instance, it is important to realize that a substantial part of South American silver went not to Europe directly, but to East Asia and South Asia, where it was used to purchase a wide array of exotic goods that were then brought to Europe. This innovation proved to be much more lucrative than the traditional way of doing business, where only elites contributed financially to the establishment of trade routes. No wonder, in a few decades, Europeans who were also eager to use the latest military technology on their vessels controlled much of the Indian Ocean. The political turmoil and deteriorating profits from various high added value goods exports eventually put the Mughal Empire in a precarious position, which meant its gradual dissolution. By the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire basically represented only Delhi and a few villages around it. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British Raj eventually dissolved what remained of the once great and prosperous empire. No one can say for sure that if it wasn't for active European involvement in South Asia, the Mughal Empire could have become the birthplace of a second alternative version of capitalism. We will never know if it could happen. History did not give the Mughal Empire an extra century to experiment with different forms of ownership and investment, as Western Europeans were the first to start the age of discovery and establish themselves as a major political and economic force in a new, increasingly globalized world. European traders and colonizers that followed them managed to incorporate the already available highly efficient Indian economic system that was producing cheap commodities into the global market. In a matter of a few decades, Western Europeans, using military technology and innovation, managed to establish a common market where the population of the Indian subcontinent was producing predominantly cheap raw sources, while Europeans encouraged and sometimes forced them to purchase manufactured goods that were produced in Europe with more and more machinery and technology involved. One of the main ideas of this episode is that the North-South division, a virtual line that divides rich northerners and poor southerners, was not predetermined. In the 17th century, Western Europe and India had equal chances to industrialize. Nevertheless, Europeans were lucky to arrive before such process occurred in India and managed to establish an economic system that would shape world economy for centuries, with Europeans producing high added value goods for the rest of the world. One more important factor that explains why modern Western Europeans are much richer than Indians is that Europeans had entire North and South America to colonize, while Indians had to share the limited sources of just one subcontinent. If hundreds of Europeans hadn't moved to the New World and hundreds of millions of their descendants now lived in Europe, GDP per capita in modern Western Europe would be significantly lower. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and recommend the topic for next video in the comment section.